in our society, in a benevolent society, there are all kinds of trade-offs that people are asked to make for the greater good. And our politics has become framed in zero-sum games around so many different things. But an important task, I think, is helping people see a bigger picture of systems at work and the larger set of trade-offs that people make.
Good evening. My name is Nat Scheidley, and I am the president and CEO of Revolutionary Spaces, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's program, Democracy Now!, hosted by Revolutionary Spaces in partnership with the Humanities Workshop, a consortium of public and private secondary school communities committed to elevating the importance of the humanities in addressing urgent social issues and thereby facilitating active, informed, and empathetic civic engagement on the part of young people and society as a whole. And with that, I am pleased to introduce the Humanities Workshop team to get us started. So please meet Lisa Baker, Elisa Braithwaite, and Melissa Figueroa. Thank you.
Welcome, I'm Lisa Baker.
I'm Elisa Braithwaite.
And I'm Melissa Figueroa. We're English teachers at Milton Academy and the leadership team for the Humanities Workshop. Thank you again, more thank yous to Revolutionary Spaces, especially our friend Ed, where's Ed, for all his support and for co-sponsoring this event in this amazing space. And once again, the GBH Forum Network for recording and producing this event.
We want to welcome our member schools, past, present, and future, Academy of the Pacific Rim, Boston College High School, Boston Collegiate Charter School, Boston Latin School, Boston International Newcomers Academy, John D. O'Brien School of Math and Science, Phillips Academy Andover, Milton Academy, Neighborhood House Charter School, and New England Innovation Academy.
And we want to just, before we step away and let this begin, we just want to really thank, deep appreciation for the 5 panelists we have who came out in between snowstorm and rainstorm to share with all of us, students and adults alike, their expertise. And we are going to pass the ball to Simone Rios. And we want to say this is a celebrated, award-winning local journalist who's agreed to moderate this panel. And we just feel really lucky that he's been so gracious and committed to this conversation from the very beginning. So we are really excited to have all of you here. Thank you so much. And we'll pass.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful turnout. What a wonderful space. I was told by one of the people who works here that the old tradition in this space is to make a lot of noise. And I don't know how we New Englanders became so polite over time, but apparently back in the revolutionary days, people made a lot more noise. So maybe we can bring some of that back. There we go. So there is going to be a Q&A section at the end, so I hope people have some questions. I understand the students might have some things to add. And to the panelists, I hope that you'll chime in. You know, if Chawky is saying something, that Dayna will jump in with something, etc. So the first thing I'd like to do is for folks to introduce themselves. If you could talk about your work and then answer this question as to how the current political moment. And by the way, when we organized this event, we had in mind that there would be a new president and that might affect some of us here. And I think that's proven true. So if you could talk about what you do and how the current moment has affected your work. Chawky.
My name is Chawky. Please do not call me Chawky. I'm not Chawky. The best way to remember my name is Chawky. I am from Lebanon originally. I came to this country at the age of 19, and I fled my country because of war in my country. I came to Boston because my aunt did all the official paper for me to come as an immigrant. And I went to Mass College of Art, where I had my bachelor. Then I went to Temple University, where I had my master's. And I always start by saying that because while I was doing both my bachelor and my master's, the war was still going on in Lebanon. And that has deeply, deeply affected not only my life, but also my art and my teaching. And I am a professor at George Mason University. This year, I'm celebrating my 25th year. And I just came a month ago from my second Fulbright in India. And I love to share with you that something very deep inside each one of us propel us to do the work that we are doing. I do not believe that there is a space where life stop and art begin. I don't believe there is a space where your life stop and what you do for work begin, because they are always interacting with each other and informing each other. And that led me to the Fulbright in India. Both of them is to say that art has a voice for peace. The nucleus of both my Fulbright is to say artists are not marginal people on the outskirts of society. Art also can have a very loud voice for democracy, for peace, and for human rights and dignity. And that's why I'm here, and it's a great privilege to be here.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. It's great to see all of you here, and especially all the young people. My name is Dayna Cunningham, and I'm the Dean of the Tisch College of Civic Life at Tufts University. And our work is all about the role of young people in democracy and the infrastructure of democracy that we call civil society. I'm a voting rights lawyer by training, and so I spent a lot of time in the US South litigating voting rights cases. And I have to say that being in this space, in this moment, it feels like absorbing the karma of this building, the generations of struggle around voice and freedom and decision-making by people about their own lives and their community's development trajectory. Feels really inspiring in this moment, and that's kind of at the core of the work that we do around understanding and strengthening civil society.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Noorya. I am a researcher. I work at the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement. Mouthful, it's CIRCLE for short. It's a nonpartisan research center that looks at youth civic engagement across the US. I study and I research civic education, so K-12 civic education, and electoral participation in young people. And those are two of my interest areas and my passion. And to Simone's question on what is affecting my work right now, I work with teachers a lot. I think it's a cliche to say that, but we call them the guardians of democracy. And we are in the K-12 civic education space coming together to look at these are foundational blocks of democracy. How do we give young people the tools to be active participants in democracy, and what does that look like across the US from teachers from all over, including Massachusetts, but all over the US. So.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sophia Hall. I'm the Deputy Litigation Director at Lawyers for Civil Rights, formerly the Lawyers Committee. I am fortunate enough to be a servant of the law, to be a civil rights attorney here in Massachusetts, and to work for a phenomenal nonprofit civil rights law firm that provides free legal representation to people who are experiencing discrimination in any facet of life. Tell you two things. So one is that when I think about sort of the synergy between the legal system, law as a tool in democracy. I think it's just all about utilizing the law to make sure that each one of us is seen and heard through our legal netting, right? Through our laws and systems. And every single case that we file, every single fight that we take on at its core is trying to tell the story of every single person that should be heard and seen through our legal system. And that is at the core of our Constitution, that is the core of our jurisprudence. And I feel really fortunate to be a warrior in that fight in all different ways, in all different facets. In some ways in this moment, things are very different and also very much the same, right? The civil rights struggle is not new. Having to challenge the experiences of people who traditionally do not have a voice and do not typically have representation in general facets of life is not new. I think what's different here is that during the flood, right, of what's been happening over the last 3 weeks under this new administration, I think we've had to remind people more than usual about the fact that they have a legal system that sees them, that believes that they are meant to be here and meant to be heard. So looking forward to having more of a dialogue about that throughout tonight.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Hansen Shapiro. I am the CEO and co-founder of the National Trust for Local News. We are the largest nonprofit local newspaper owner in the country. Me personally, I'm not a journalist. I'm actually an academic by training. Originally a humanist. I was a Latin scholar in college for all of you Latinists out there. And then studied organizational behavior and sociology at Harvard. And I come to this work of local journalism with a really deep belief that I know is shared by all of you, that in order to have a functioning democracy, we have to have an informed citizenry. And that means that all of us need to know and understand what's happening out there. We need to know and understand how our laws work, how governing works, how our country works. But we also really need to be connected to each other. And so the other piece of what drives me in my work is a sense that local storytelling in particular, telling the stories of joy and of triumph and of all of the amazing things that happen in our world every day, is just a really critical function for keeping us together. So we have to be able to engage in our democracy, and we have to be able to engage with each other. And for me, what this moment means is both we need to be informed, and more than ever, we need to be connected. We need to be connected to each other. We need to be connected to the stories of people who live right next door to us, who live many states away, who live many countries away. And that to me is really the most important, highest calling of local journalism. I'm happy to talk more about that.
We will. Well, Chawky. Did I get it right that time? Chawky. Thank you. You didn't tell us how the current political moment is affecting. You were just in Varanasi, India. That's when we met via Zoom. And then you came back here a few months ago. How are you feeling what's happening now politically in the United States?
Well, I will start by saying one of the greatest danger to democracy is to put a label on someone and you stop hearing them because you're seeing the label and not the person. I want to start by saying, even though I've been called a liberal and a Democrat and this and that, I promise you, and I want to say it very loud and clear, I'm neither, because I refuse anything that makes divide and conquer. And this country is being divided and conquered by making us more busy by labels. You are liberal, you are conservative, you are Democrat, you are Republican, you are this, you are that. As I have said in my introduction, I lived the war. My country, Lebanon, has been destroyed because people put their party before the country, because people put personal gain before the interests of the country. Literally, the country has been so fragmented, not only between parties, but within each parties. And my big alarm, even before this current administration took place. I've been here for 45 years, and I have seen an accumulation of fragmentation and loyalty to the party and loyalty to the ideology taking precedence over the loyalty to the country. And in my opinion, whether it is this administration or even the previous one or even the previous one, we've been sliding into the wrong path. And as you said, I came from India. It seems that the phenomenon is global, not just American. You know, I lived in the Middle East. I've been to Turkey 3 times. I lived in Egypt for a while. And I'm seeing the rise of extremes, whether it's right or left. Both of them are becoming extreme, and the dialogue is not happening anymore. So when you're talking about connectedness and hearing the other, in my opinion, this is one of the greatest threats to democracy, because we are not interested in hearing what the other is saying, because the other has become the one that we want to exclude, the one that we want to call you are unpatriotic. And I genuinely feel that it's not something that happened in the past month. It's been happening and degrading and building slowly. And that's what I really feel.
Dean Cunningham, from the College of Civic Life, you're in the midst of this right now. And I'm curious to hear your reaction to that idea that the United States, the beacon of democracy for the world, is, in some people's estimation, in some ways, going the direction of countries that don't have the democratic traditions that we do.
I think that's right. I agree with that. And I think it's very important to listen to each other and to hear our stories to understand why some of us would choose that, and to understand what the alternatives might be. And by that, I mean, I have always said that, you know, for the last several years, I have said, people don't believe that democracy delivers. They don't believe that it addresses the core concerns they have. And part of it is because we talk about it in abstractions. But if you are a kid whose mom is undocumented, and you leave the house every day worried that she won't be there when you get home, that is not an abstraction, and that is a question of democracy. It is a question of policy. It is a question of agreements made by, by lawmakers, and what I mean by that is these are questions of human decision-making. They are not natural forces or inevitable moves. They are things that enough of us have agreed to that they exist. And the question becomes, how do we see enough of what it means to make these decisions and see enough of our own strength and power to change these decisions so that we will act to change these decisions over time, and hopefully sooner rather than later. And so that, to me, gets to the question of knowledge. And speaking in particular to the students here, the one thing that you guys have at your fingertips every single day is the capacity to learn. You're in school. You have access to all kinds of knowledge. And it has never been more important than it is now to educate yourself, to pay attention, to discern the reality in terms of the impact on people of these decisions that we humans are making. And so, and that is, I think, the hope for our future, that you guys will figure that out, that you'll begin to discern, in fact, what makes a difference in a bad way and what makes a difference in a good way for our communities, for our country, for our democracy.
When I was coming over here, I was thinking about what we would talk about tonight, and one of the ideas that's come to me over time, more as of late, is that we take what we have for granted. I think the education system that we have here, the democracy that we have here, the tradition of freedom, of rights that we have in this country, that we don't appreciate it. It's the soup that we swim in. When you go to another place that doesn't have those things, you start to see. what we do have in our country. Noorya, you're studying this phenomenon. You're studying youth engagement. You actually have data regarding the engagement of young people in this country. Talk about that.
So, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, so I will first talk about the electoral participation because we're just coming out of an election. And in 2020, we had historical youth voter turnout. And that broke records of the past 5 decades, right? But in this election, there was a dip in youth voter turnout. However, this did not mean when we're studying young people that young people were disengaged. In fact, a lot of young people said, majority of them said, we're dissatisfied with how democracy is working for us, but we're not disengaged, right? So we've been studying this, the center that's at Tisch College too, has been studying this for the past 2 decades. And year after year, about 3 out of 4 young people say, we really believe in our power to change things. We believe in individual efficacy and collective efficacy. So we believe in our power, we believe in working together, and even more than 80% of youth say, we believe in working with other generations to make change, right? However, this interest and engagement doesn't always translate into tools for democracy because there is a gap. There's a gap between knowing that we have agency and efficacy, but learning the tools to do so, and schools and knowledge, learning that knowledge, that skills, those civic dispositions of what that means in a democracy, that is highly inequitable across the country. So we are in a state actually that is working towards it, but that's not always the case across the US, and you see that more and more. So for instance, at the federal level till 2023, the investment in civic education was 5 cents per student per year in K-12 education, civics education. It was increased to 15 cents in 2023, which is a 3-fold increase, but still. And compared to STEM education, it was pretty paltry because STEM education gets about $50 per student per year from the federal government, right? So if you just contrast the disinvestment in K-12 civic education in the past 7 decades, I think you can see the consequences of that around you and how the health and future of our democracy is directly tied to civics education.
And you're actually doing surveys of young people. And what does the data show in terms of how engaged people are?
So people are engaged. Like I said, yes, youth voter turnout is one metric, how many young people showed out to the elections, but young people are engaged in communities. They're engaged in issues. So young people are issue-centric voters. They're not loyal to parties. They're not loyal to candidates, but they really care about issues. And this year, the biggest issue, regardless, was the economy, jobs, costs of living, inflation. A lot of young people said they were financially struggling, and that affected on how our systems working for them, including does their voice matter? On the other hand, in the surveys, we also asked them, did any of your education in high school help you? And so young people who had meaningful experience, developing skills, having student voice in school, coming to events, were twice more likely to say we understand why our vote matters, why voting matters, right? So, yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Sophia, we've known each other for a little while. Sophia is with Lawyers for Civil Rights, which is on the forefront of many of the things that we're dealing with as a country today, really. Day one of Donald Trump's presidency, there was a lawsuit that came down, which didn't surprise me, but it was quick. Was it day one, actually? Was it
Midnight.
Midnight, okay. That counts. I'll give you that. That's the one lawsuit you have at the moment. I have a feeling there will be others, if I know LCR at all. Talk about that. This is the birthright citizenship issue, which Trump tried to do away with an executive order. What was the reaction there?
Yeah, so I mean, I know I'm not alone in knowing that We're 22 days in, right? And we've seen 220 executive orders that have either reversed some action from the prior administration or just blatantly done things that are incredibly unlawful on their face, right? And a lot of what we've talked about more recently has been the sort of immigration-related executive orders, but candidly, there's a lot of concern, in my opinion, around the DEI stuff as well. So, but for another conversation, when the birthright citizenship executive order came down, so on the day of inauguration, there was an executive order signed that basically said that if you are the child of your parents are immigrants, that you could forfeit your constitutional right under the 14th Amendment, which is quite clear on its face, to participate as a citizen in this country, to be recognized as a citizen in this country. We are fundamentally making children, and children that are yet to be born, stateless in America. And I can use a lot of legal words to tell you about how the Supreme Court for a century has talked about this being unlawful, unconstitutional, the equivalent of torture. But all the humans in the room, it's racist and it's cruel and it's wrong. So on midnight on the day of inauguration, we filed one of the first lawsuits in the country challenging that executive order and very simply stating that it was unconstitutional. And you likely know now that we are one of a handful of lawsuits across the country. We have actually had a group of attorney generals here in Massachusetts that have filed a case that is related to our case. So we're fighting in partnership with government on the same side to basically say this is unconstitutional and unacceptable to try to strip people of citizenship in the ways that we have always historically recognized. But what does it mean at a basic level outside the law? It means that I spent a lot of time in hospitals and shelters with very, very frightened parents and very, very frightened mothers who are on the cusp of giving birth, which should be the moment in their life that is full of joy. And instead it was full of fear. And so our lawsuit in particular is really focused on thinking about those expectant mothers and the harm to them through this legal action, and talking about that from that perspective through the use of experts and others. And there are lots of cases that are talking about this, but that's sort of our perspective and the voice that we are elevating, the storytelling that we are doing to the court system to talk about why this is so fundamentally wrong.
The plaintiffs in the case are named as Jane Doe, right? But I'm curious to hear what you can share about them individually and how they're processing this moment.
They're heartbroken. Yeah. Again, these are just people who are, like so many of us, trying to build families in America at a very fundamental way, right? We thrive and we succeed because of those that we support and bring along, whether it is your own children, your community, your tribe, right? Whatever it is, the people who you are in community with, the people you connect to, is a motivator for all of us, for why we live, why we exist, and why we thrive. And to have that, that certainty diminished, to have the questions of the child that is not yet here, will they be able to have access to healthcare in their early days when it's so desperately needed? Will they have access to a social security number so as they move forward in life, they can navigate in society in the way that we all do? Will they ever be able to obtain a passport so they can enjoy the treasure and the wonder that is traveling this beautiful world, right? These are the questions that they wrestle with while sitting in hospitals, waiting to be, induced, waiting to have their due date come. And for some people, the most vulnerable of which, there are women in shelters with no homes and no idea yet about a plan for how they are going to sustain themselves and their family, who are now adding this additional burden of the what ifs.
Where's the case at now? You got a kind of favorable hearing the other day. How are you feeling about the status of the case?
I'm feeling good, just so you guys know. And just so you know, I only exist in this world because of my optimism. So you call it naive if you want, but I believe that we all have to be here and we got to fight for the goal, right? That's it. And if you're not fighting towards the goal, then you're losing. And so for us, we filed this lawsuit at midnight. We had a lot of late nights doing this work in-house to get this on file. We did something called a preliminary injunction, which is a fancy legal way of saying, we said, hey, court, I need you to see it right now and do something right now about what's happening. And a judge in the federal district court right over here in Seaport heard us on Friday. And so we and a group of the attorney generals were heard by the court, and we are waiting for a decision at any moment right now. I will say we will hopefully join 2 other judges who have already said, absolutely stop this executive order from going into effect right now. But I want you to know, I want our win right here in Massachusetts. And I want it on behalf of these expectant mothers rather than organizations or groups. Not to say that all of them don't have incredibly worthwhile means, but I want it on behalf of these moms. I want it in Massachusetts, and I want it on behalf of these moms. And I want an order that says not only is this unlawful and unconstitutional, and it can't go into effect here in Massachusetts, we're not going to let it go into effect anywhere in this country. And so that's what we're fighting for. And so any day, any moment, we should know that.
Well, I was going to ask you to break some news about the next lawsuits, but that's probably not going to happen. We'll talk offline. Elizabeth, you're in the journalism world, in the nonprofit journalism world, every story we hear about journalism these days, including in my world, in public radio, is not great. But you're coming up with an alternative model. Talk to us about that. You're in 3 different states. You're based locally, but your organization has newspapers in different parts of the country. Talk about what's the model behind this?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. So, as you know, well, you're part of a public media organization. So there are a few and growing number of nonprofit news organizations, but a lot of our news organizations are corporately owned. And what that has meant in this country is that when push comes to shove, like the bottom line and profitability has been more important than service. And so as a result, we've seen, particularly in local journalism, newspapers closing and continuing to close. And so we founded the National Trust for Local News to say, well, what if we built a different model, particularly for newspapers? Now, I love public radio and public television. I think also having a very challenging moment under this administration. But for those of you who read your small local papers, or maybe you come from a town that has a small local paper, the deep love and affection and trust that people have for their newspapers. And so the kind of animating idea of the National Trust was like, well, what if we could build like a nature conservancy, but instead of buying beautiful open land, we could acquire small newspapers, and we could find ways to help them survive and thrive in this new environment, and be able to think about, local news as an asset that should be with us for the long term, not just for like next year or the year after. So that was the kind of animating idea. That's the model. We acquire newspapers, we turn them into nonprofits, we build community boards, we raise local philanthropy, and then we also really help on the the folks maybe on the first floor here may still read their news in print, but I bet all those kids up there don't necessarily open a paper every morning. So how can we figure out ways to reach young people who are not necessarily picking up that paper, but who still want to be informed? And in fact, it's really important that they're informed and engaged. So a lot of what we do is also, helping newspapers figure out could you be on email? Could you be on TikTok? Could you be on Instagram? What are all the different ways that you can start to reach folks who might not, read traditional media?
And so you're in Maine, in Georgia,
Yep.
and what is the other state?
Maine and Georgia and Colorado. So we own 64 newspapers in those states. And then we've had the wonderful privilege of talking to really family publishers around the country because, we have a lot of corporate media, but we also have a lot of family-owned media. And there's a lot of folks in their 70s and 80s who, they love being publishers, but they don't necessarily want to be publishers forever. And so That's the other really important piece of our model, is being sure that there's a home for those kinds of papers going forward.
Wow. Talk about why that matters, like the importance of local news,
Yeah.
because everything's vertical videos,
Yes.
I'll admit, I do some of those myself. But, we're going up against the podcast sphere where people will get on and say whatever they want. And local journalists are the ones, picking away, trying and find the facts.
Yes.
Everything we report has to be verified before we put it in print.
Yes.
In this moment, in this time, not just the current president, but everything we're experiencing, why does this type of reporting matter?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And it matters for all the reasons you talked about. I mean, as you all know, like, we are living in a deeply distrustful moment, right? And the digital media that so many of us consume is like, it's like drinking dirty water or breathing dirty air. It's just like not good for you, like mentally or, in any way. And the importance of high quality local journalism is that there are actually, as you said, standards by which you go and talk to people, the way you treat your sources, the way you verify facts, the way there's like editors that be sure that, that are being sure that you're being fair, and covering all your bases. So, that is why in this moment in particular, when there's so much like spin and there's so much like illusion and there's so much like, sort of like bizarre, like fantasizing, pretending like it's truth and facts. That's really why, particularly locally, it's so important to have journalists who are operating by that code of ethics, and to have, real news publications that can back them up. Because, if you are just a single reporter out there, you can do your best, but really what you need is the power of like other people around you and the power of an institution to be able to back you up, especially in this moment when there's so many powerful people trying to tear things down and tear the truth down.
I've noticed that recently a reporter who in the Spanish-speaking world in Massachusetts, who I'm familiar with, is facing threats of lawsuits from people she's covering in, I'll say it, in Lawrence, in Lawrence, Massachusetts. And I realized that we, as somebody as part of Boston University, a larger news organization, they won't threaten us in the same way because we have lawyers.
That's right.
But if you're on your own,
You have
good luck.
lawyers and you have insurance, and you have like a really important backing. But yeah, if you're just like a solo journalist out there, it's so scary.
So the people in your organization, these are small newspapers,
Yes.
but there's a larger
But there's
organization
a larger
to back them
organization.
up.
We are backing them up. Yeah, exactly.
I have a couple of questions, if I may. One of the things that you spoke about is very, very big issue for me is like when we're talking about these people getting their information from social media, there is incredible disinformation and misinformation happening, and there is no way. I mean, you talk to 20 people, they have 20 different points of view because each one is reading different things. That's one issue that is a very big threat to democracy. The second big issue that is very big threat to democracy is that we lost trust and faith even in the established media, like the New York Times, even the big name that have the money, that have the lawyers, but they are all in the pocket of lobbyists, in the pocket of corporation, and there is incredible amount of censorship. You can do this, but you cannot do that, and they cut and paste, and they do anything they want. So the issue is not just in the past month since the election, it's been happening for years. That's what I'm talking about, that there are literally decades of going downhill and no one is saying anything about it. The second question I have for you is, you see, we have here in the audience people from different perspectives and they're not all the converted ones. And I want to ask you, what would you say to people who say, why do I have to work 24 hours a day to pay for someone who is taking advantage of the legal system, of the immigration? And I promise you, I mean, I live in Washington, D.C. I have a friend who put me in her car, and she is a lawyer, by the way, and she is Cuban, by the way. She put me in her car, and she took me in one of the most expensive neighborhood not in Georgetown, I live in Arlington, in another area, okay. And
DC area.
DC area, thank you, sir. And she showed me all the low-income housing that is supported by our government and by the taxpayer money. And she told me, look at the cars in front of their houses. Why should I pay for them? So what would you say to some of these people who are here in the audience?
Who's that question for? For Sophia. So, lucky you.
And the other one about media for you.
Well, so I'll just say, I think the trust in the national media has been low and declining, and that's absolutely correct. What's interesting is that local media has actually maintained trust. So the Pew Research Center does survey research asking about trust in all institutions, but including media. And they have consistently found that, people will say, well, I don't trust cable news and I don't trust, the New York Times, but I do trust my local newspaper. And I think that is because, especially in the moment that we're in, people want to know about what's happening in their backyards. They want to know about what's happening in the town that they live in. They want to know what's happening in the city that they live close to. And so that level of trust, I think, is so, so critical. And it's such an important resource for all of us in this moment as we do this work, because it means that we can, cover issues and tell stories and reach out and make connections in a way that it's much harder to do if you're thinking about okay, well, what's happening in Washington, right? And I'm just relying on national media to tell me. I might not know anybody, right? It's really important. That local connection and that sense of local agency, I think, is really important. And that trust in local media, I think, really reflects that.
And
Yeah,
on the
please.
young people perspective, that's true for young people as well. So yes, social media really does influence them, but by far, family and peers are the main source of information and influence for young people, and local journalism counts in that too. They do trust that when it comes to their inner circle, even more than social media. So they do consume a lot of different media, but what they trust is still family, friends, and information from trusted sources around them.
What happens when in the same family you have very far right and very far left, and they don't want to be together for Thanksgiving?
Well, that's where then young people need to have those tools, right? How do you engage across difference and, yes, make up your mind on that, yeah.
And I would also add that we have to promote discernment. So to your friend who says, why should I be supporting these people? Does she have a mortgage, and does she get a tax deduction for her mortgage? Can we see the totality of the circumstances that we are living in and not just pit ourselves against each other, right? So yeah, so if you have a mortgage deduction, why should the people living in subsidized housing have to pay your mortgage deduction in their taxes? Do you understand? So helping our students in particular understand sort of systems questions and not just the very narrow self-interest kinds of equations that our politics is posing for us now.
How are they subsidizing your mortgage?
If I work every day and I pay income taxes, but I don't have, and I don't want to get too deep into the rabbit hole of taxes, right? But if I work every day and I pay income taxes, but I don't have a house, and you work every day and you pay income taxes, but you have a house and a mortgage, you are deducting the cost of the mortgage from your taxes. It's a benefit that you have that I don't have. So one way of thinking about it is, I'm subsidizing your mortgage because I'm paying a tax that you don't pay. And without getting into all of the sort of the rabbit hole of tax policy, I'm saying in our society, in a benevolent society, there are all kinds of trade-offs that people are asked to make for the greater good. And our politics has become framed in zero-sum games around so many different things. But an important task, I think, is helping people see a bigger picture of systems at work and the larger set of trade-offs that people make as a society, so that... You call that communism? What I call what communism? I'm just...
We're going to open it up to questions in
Yeah.
just a minute here. So.
Yeah, and I don't think labels don't help. So I would just say that let's think about. I would just say, let's think about the ways that as a society, we make decisions to benefit the greater good, and that should be a standard we try to come back to, and not just, well, what's in it for me, and how do I get the most out of a situation, and how do I make sure somebody else doesn't get it? That's my main.
Okay, who's got questions in here? Okay. Do we have a microphone to go around, or you just want to stand up? Go for it. I think you can yell. But...
I can yell like the old days. I appreciate you. My question to you, clarify how you can give someone $25,000 down payment on a house just because they're below poverty level. Tell me if this is not communism.
Yeah, there are all kinds of policies in this country that support certain groups of people and not others. All kinds. And I don't want to get into a debate with you because there are a lot of people here who have questions too. But I would just say that my feeling is, kind of what is the larger policy behind mortgage subsidies and tax breaks and these kinds of policies reflect deeper social values. And I'm asking that we think about the social values that are underlying the decisions that get made. Why is there a child, why is there a tax, and look, I'm not a tax lawyer, but why is there a deduction for dependents? Because we want to give people a break who are supporting families. Is that a good idea? Yeah. Is that communism? That's an irrelevant kind of question, and it polarizes. So
Okay,
I'm just, yeah.
thank you.
I think we have to think about larger social good. That's my point.
Anybody else?
I have a comment instead of a question. So Elizabeth was talking about local newspapers, and so I have my own newspaper in my grade. So like if a kid throws a rock at a window or something like that, I would write about it, and there's like all different kinds of sections in each one.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Very cool.
Hi there. Thank you so much for coming. I'm a high school junior, and when I read legal news, right, I find it hard to parse as somebody who isn't trained in the law how politically motivated people's opinions are. And so when we have all these debates, especially when a new administration comes in and there are lots of legal challenges about the validity of what a politician might be doing, and somebody with a law degree can get on the front page of the Wall Street Journal and really say anything, and most of us will not have any way of distinguishing whether they're manipulating their legal knowledge or whether they're sharing it with us. How can we then make these legal debates accessible to the public in a way where we can actually have a democratic conversation about legal discourse?
Great question. Yeah, Sophia, I think that one's for you.
Yeah, I love that question. And candidly, so I'm a first-generation college student. I'm first lawyer in my family. And a big reason why I do public interest work, right, is because I thought of lawyers in a really narrow way, and they felt really inaccessible to me, and legal work felt really inaccessible to me. And so what I really like about my particular practice and my experience as a lawyer is that my clients and community members that I work with see me as Sophia first and lawyer second. And I do think that it is incumbent upon all of us to be talking about legal jargon in normal ways, which is why I tell you at a basic level, I think the Birthright Citizenship Executive Order is racist and cruel. It is racist, which makes it discriminatory, which makes it violate our laws, but also just at a basic level, it's racist, right? And we could have a conversation that way. I guess what I would encourage you to do, to the extent that you are really interested in having those debates, let's put a debate together. Like, let's make spaces to have those conversations. Call me up, call up one of my lawyers, and like, let's come out and have that dialogue and talk about it. Because candidly, if we are not having these conversations in the court of public opinion with normal people in normal ways, then we're not doing our job right.
Hi, my question is for Elizabeth. How do you make sure that the papers that your nonprofit is helping out don't have to cut back in the same ways that Gannett and McClatchy and the like have been? I'm concerned about things I've read in Dan Kennedy's column about the Portland Press Herald and the other main papers having to cut back, and wondering whether your nonprofit is really going to save them and keep them healthy.
Thank you for that question. I mean, the power of our nonprofit model is that we can leverage local philanthropy, right? So when we say when we look at, the news business, which is a hard business, right? It's a hard business, period. We can say, okay, there's here are the things we want to do. Here's the things we can't do anymore. And then we can go to, there's a lot of wealthy people in a lot of places and say, can you please help us do this? And, we have the advantage in so many communities of there being people who with the means to actually, help us do that. So that is the power and the promise of the model. Now, in any given moment, can we find enough wealthy people to help us do what we want to do? Sometimes we can and sometimes we can't. But that is the promise of the model, is that we don't have shareholders. We don't have we're not owned by private equity that's I got to get my 5% this year. But we do have to ask a lot of wealthy people to help us.
We got one over there. Yep. Hi. Excuse me. Thank you all so much for coming. I have a question for Professor Cunningham. So on you were talking earlier about how people feel disengaged from civic life because of this self-interested attitude. So right now, 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. And I think that's the root of a lot of this sort of self-interested social chauvinism that you talk about. So I'm wondering, do you think that a greater level of social welfare is a prerequisite to people thinking more about other people in the way that we engage with politics?
I think, so I was listening to an NPR story a while ago, and it was talking about a ship of refugees that washed up in Italy somewhere. And the reporter says, the interviewee says, thank God it washed up in a poor neighborhood. It washed up in a poor neighborhood. The boat washed up on shore in a poor neighborhood because people came out with blankets and food and were there to help the stranded people. And so I actually think that it is human nature to help. I think it's an animal instinct that we have to stay alive because we don't have claws and fangs, yeah? And so, but I think there is this relentless discourse machine in social media and elsewhere that is telling us to just look out for ourselves. But it's kind of related to the local media that at a local level, people help each other. And so I think, especially now, we have to do more to dig into our communities and to figure out who haven't we heard from, who haven't we seen, how can we help? And I think in doing that, people feel a sense of agency and efficacy and satisfaction when they can care for other people. I just think it helps to be focused in a level where you can see people and engage with people and run into them in supermarkets, and to kind of not look so much at the national debate in the air that is not relevant to your particular circumstances.
So I'd just like to go back to Sophia for 1 second. You talked about the lawsuit that you're in right now. I guess my biggest question for you is, you speak of democracy, you speak of what's fair. Why is it fair for the people that are allowed to be able to come over here and walk over the border illegally, for them to be allowed to have all of these things that the US citizens have and to just be handed that? But people from other countries that don't have the luxury of being able to illegally cross borders and have their babies here, and then their babies and those families are now entitled to the same things that the Americans are entitled to. Why is it the people from the other countries are not given that same opportunity to come over here? No, they don't get to come here. We have family in Lebanon that they will die first before they can come here and get visas, but they are not allowed that. So we talk about fairness, let's talk about fairness. What she's talking about is not fair.
All right, let's give Sophia a chance to respond to that. Thank you.
And I mean, we can be here all night talking about all of the different types of immigration policies we have in this country, right? What I am talking about is in this specific context, in response to this specific executive order, it's unconstitutional. We have a constitution that explicitly tells you under the 14th Amendment how you obtain citizenship. Feet in the soil is what we have recognized under our written constitution and what's been upheld in this country by the Supreme Court for a century. I am by no means telling you that other decision-making is fair or unfair, not at all. But I am saying in this particular context, in response to this particular executive order, this is unlawful. This is contrary to how we have identified citizenship for more than 100 years. So two wrongs don't necessarily imply that we should strip children or expectant mothers who are going to have children from a right that we've recognized for more than 100 years.
There are other countries with birthright citizenship.
Limited.
Hello. Any questions from up in the rafters? Just yell it out. Here we go. You, sir.
My question was, how can you combat disinformation in a citizenry already failed in education?
So the question is, how do you combat misinformation? Disinformation. And the second part?
In a citizenry already failed by the education.
Okay, in a society already failed by the education system. Okay, Noorya, good question for you.
Failed by the education system. Like I said, yes, there have been persistent inequities in education system, and it starts by fixing that, right? So in Massachusetts, for instance, they have started media literacy in as early as 3rd grade, right? It's like, look at your sources. Who is saying, someone was saying, what are the political motivations for someone to write? Who's the author? Who's the audience? It starts early because young people are exposed to media and digital literacy so early. So yes, it starts with helping young people. It starts with training teachers to learn how to do media literacy or digital news media literacy for young people as well. And it starts with families. So a lot of what young people consume is what's happening in the household. And we inadvertently might be exposing them to things that we have not verified. So a lot of that training actually comes from communities and families. So it's access, exposure, supports, and culture that we develop around consumption of media that happens from schools and communities that need to come together to do so.
Well, thank you so much to everybody who came, to Lisa and everyone else who organized this tonight. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you again to the panelists. We are super grateful. And actually, I think this kind of civil dialogue is exactly what we need to be practicing. So it's great for our students to be a part of this evening and great for you to be helping us get there.